Okay guys, well it's been a really eventful 2020 KAF season, inaugural season. For those of you who do follow, you already know this, but for those of you who don't, I made Angler of the Year. So I'm pretty happy with that. That's one of the things I wanted to do this year, is really just put forth like the best effort I could and really try to put myself in a position to do that. And I thought I could do it, and turns out I did. So what I want to do is I want to talk about every tournament, recap, talk about what's coming up, and break down exactly how this season went and what I did. You know, it's a pretty interesting season from my perspective, and there were a lot of ups, there were a lot of downs, but I had a lot of fun doing it. Now, before I start this, if you are interested in fishing the KAF, the new season is going to start in November. They've backed it up a little bit, so we're going to run. I think it's going to run from November to June. They want to kind of be off the water before hurricane season, and they want to get most of our fishing done during the months where we're not out here dying of heat stroke. So keep that in mind. So that being said, if you're interested in that, I will have a link to the Facebook page for the KAF if you want to go ahead and check that out. It's $50 to sign up for the season. That $50 goes towards the championship pot. There's an entrance fee for each tournament. It was $40. I think it's going to stay about the same. They want to try to get more people on board. I believe there will still be the option to fish 1 or 2 tournaments at a lower cost, but you'll need to check with the guys over at the KAF for that. So our championship is coming up. I'm out here at the St. John's just kind of messing around, having fun, seeing if I can find something. I'm not even close to where I want to go yet. I got a decent paddle, let's put it that way. I'm looking forward to that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. Okay, so let's talk about the tournament trail. So, and recap that. Let's start with Okeechobee. Okeechobee was kind of intimidating to me. It's a big lake. We all launched from the same launch for the very first event, and that was before coronavirus and stuff kicked in and all that jazz. Now, Okeechobee, if you've ever watched anybody fish Okeechobee, especially if you've watched Scott or Roland Martin fish it, there's 2 things that you really need to look for. You need to look for clear water and vegetation. Now, Irma came through and ripped up most of the vegetation, so my initial plan of going down into the monkey box kind of got skunked, and in conversation with one of my fellow anglers, it wasn't worth the run. It's a big lake, and fishing kayak tournaments is not like fishing bass boat tournaments where, okay, this spot doesn't work here, we're going to make a 6-mile run this way. This just doesn't happen. 6 miles will take you, maybe 2 or 3 hours depending on what kind of watercraft you have and the conditions. So you have to kind of find spots that are going to produce, and you kind of have to stick with them and hope that they have the fish that you need. Now, I've made multiple runs, and some runs have saved me, some runs cost me. But Okeechobee's not a place where we could do it. They want everybody to run off the same ramp. Now, I spent a lot of time pre-fishing and then eliminating water. Just got a bump. I didn't catch anything in the pre-fish when I was down there. I went down to the monkey box and everything. Most of the water was like chocolate milk, even though it was about 2 or 3 feet deep. So what ended up happening was I stayed on one side of the lake where the wind was blowing in my face, which is typically not where you want to be, but I used my native Slayer 10 and the fact that it's a light kayak, and I used that ability to get back into stuff that was only like 1 or 2 feet deep, and I was catching fish off of isolated cover. Just these reeds sitting out in the middle of nowhere. And the water was clear, you could see to the bottom. So I would catch 2 or 3 fish off a group of reeds and move on to the next one. And that worked out. Now the fish weren't huge. The biggest fish I saw that day was maybe 4 pounds, and it was on a bed, but it was towards the end of the day and it was windy, and I just got a glimpse of it and I lost it. And couldn't find it, couldn't get it to hit. Fishing that lake was a challenge. Now, the only thing I've wanted to do each tournament is get 5 fish and then begin to call. If I can get my limit, I at least stand a chance of doing better than a lot of people. I knew the fish were going to be finicky, so I went with a finesse style wacky rig Senko, and I ended up catching about 10 fish that day. My 5 biggest got me to around 67 inches, and it got me into second place. I was one of 2 anglers that caught 5 fish that day. Ryan won it. Ryan has a couple spots down there. He fishes that lake off a lot more than I do, so it worked out for him. So congrats to Ryan on that. But I'd take second to start out the season. Worked out. It was a lot of fun. We had about 30 anglers there. It was really cool. But that was the key, was finding clear water, which I did, and it was only in about a foot or two. So most of the time I wasn't using the pedal drive. I had the pedal drive up and I was paddling. And then from there, it was just getting the fish that hit, and they were really finicky. Get off that. They were really finicky, and they really wanted something that was tiny and finesse, and it just happened to be the wacky rig Senko. So the second tournament took place at Salt Springs up at Lake George, and they gave us some boundaries on Lake George that we could fish certain waters, creeks and stuff like that. So what made this one really challenging was the fact that the lake itself was much shallower than it had been in previous years. The 2019 Bassmaster Elite Series that was on the lake saw huge bags being pulled out, multiple 30-pound bags. Rick Clun had some crazy numbers, had almost 90 pounds in the tournament overall, which is huge. And I went and I found a lot of the spots that those guys were fishing, but the water was almost 2 feet shallower than when they were fishing it. So it made those spots all negligible. There were no fish. I couldn't find any fish on the lake. I tried Salt Springs. It was about 53 degrees when I tried Salt Springs. The water is warm, but I couldn't find any fish. I couldn't find any grass. I was fishing the edges, so nothing. So I decided to make a run into on the St. John's to the lower limit of where we could fish, and lo and behold, that happened to be the right place, but I wasn't using the right style of bait. The fish were really finicky again, and one of the gentlemen I talked to finished in third, was catching them on a wacky rig Senko. Now I was fishing a Senko, but I was fishing it Texas style, and they really wanted it wacky rigged. But I ended up finding the fish, catching a wacky rig Senko. It was just too late to make something happen, and I probably could have taken fourth, but I ended up missing 2 or 3 fish. So the next tournament was at Fellsmere. And Fellsmere, you can put up crazy numbers there. I've done it. I felt that was my best chance to definitely secure a win, because I feel really confident fishing there. And pulling a 100-inch day or more is nothing. And I knew you'd have to have over 100 inches to win that tournament. The one thing that I made the mistake of doing was trying to get crafty, and I didn't stick to what I know how to do there. And I didn't stick to I went to a couple normal spots, but I didn't really stick with it. And the issue with that is that when you try to do something that's not your norm, you really set yourself up for failure. Especially if you haven't practiced it. So I went up, got out, I caught one really good one early in the day, 22-incher, and then just proceeded to catch a bunch of small fish. What really kind of angered me is that if I'd have gone where I normally go, or where I wanted to go, I probably would have done pretty well. I went up a week later and put up 106.5 inches, which would have won the tournament. David won with 105 inches. I was fishing swim baits, topwater, worms, everything that you normally fish. I just wasn't fishing in the spots that I should have been fishing. And the places that I should have gone, only a few people went, and those few people were the ones who did the best. So I really messed up on that one, and I ended up taking a 10th place finish. And that one's on me, because I should have just stuck with my game plan that I normally have when I go there, but I tried to get crafty and it backfired, and it's the last time I tried to do something that was out of my norm. So we fast forward, let's go to Orange Lake. Orange Lake was tough. The water temperature up there was much cooler than any of the lakes that I've fished previous. The water was fairly warm at Fellsmere, and the fish liked warm water at Fellsmere. But at Lake Orange, it was colder, and the water was deeper. So I knew that fishing what they call the honey hole in the southwest corner was probably the place I wanted to be, but I couldn't get anything to bite in the pre-fish. I had two bowfin hit a chatterbait, but no bass. So I figured the fish, because the water was still a little bit cooler, it's still early in the year, the fish are probably going to be kind of finicky. So I switched over to Wacky Rig Senko, day of the tournament, and I figured if I don't catch them on this, then there are no fish here, or it's just going to be a really tough day. It was a tough day. I was one of, I think, 3 or 4 people that caught a limit. I had my limit early, and I was pretty happy about that. The only thing I didn't have was quality fish. Most of the fish, again, were small. And the few people that were catching good fish only had 1 or 2 on the board by midday. So I felt pretty good about that. The only thing that I would have changed is I would have gone one direction first and then gone back the other one. So at Orange Lake, there's just a ton of hydrilla, like a ridiculous amount, which means a high biomass. And what worked for me was going out and just dropping in pockets that were next to the shoreline or anywhere that was close to a lot of cover. The biggest fish I caught there, I think, was 16 and a half. If I would have caught one more of that size, I probably could have eked out a win. But Dave took him all day to catch 5 fish, but he caught 5. So I ended up taking second there, but it wasn't what I wanted. I was still chasing that win. So now we move on to Lake Kissimmee. Lake Kissimmee was another challenge. It's a big lake. They wanted to fish big bodies of water. They wanted to fish popular bodies of water. And Lake Kissimmee is a big lake, and there's a lot of water to cover. And the thing with Lake Kissimmee in recent years is it doesn't have enough hydrilla like Lake Toho does, and Lake Toho right now has a little bit too much. So finding the fish was going to be tough. If you want to find fish on that chain, you got to find the hydrilla, and you got to find like the real key spots, shell beds, stuff like that. So I did a pre-fish, and I caught 2 or 3 fish each time I pre-fish, and I made my decision to go and fish a section of the lake where I had caught 2 fish. And the only reason I did that is because that's where I figured the most fish would be. It wasn't that far away from the boat ramp. It was probably about a 1.5 mile to 2 mile paddle. The other spots I was looking at were more like 3. So I went there, and lo and behold, I found a couple spots that just held 2 or 3 fish each. So I caught my limit, and I was done by 9. I had a limit by 9. Now the problem here was the same problem I was having in all the other places, and I was not pulling in bigger fish. There weren't many big fish pulled out of Kissimmee, and that was kind of a shocker to me. The fact that I held on to the lead for as long as I did was kind of key to me that, you know, the fishing's going to be tough. So I ended up having my limit and really just struggling to hold on to the lead. I was trying to find fish to call. I missed one good one right at the end of the day that may or may not have won me that if it was a bass. I'd have no idea what it was. I know it grabbed the line and it started swimming. I set the hook, and the hook came out. Now, it could have either been a bowfin or it could have been a bass. I wasn't sure. It didn't stay on the line long enough. I just know that it was, when it came off the hook, it left a pretty good wake. So that's another opportunity gone where I could have won the tournament. Ended up getting knocked into 3rd place. Not by much, though, but 3rd place. Again, just one of 3 guys that caught a full limit. Fishing was tough. It seemed like every lake that we fished, for whatever reason, the conditions were tough. So after Kissimmee, the next tournament was at least Lake Istapoga. Istapoga was supposed to be a tournament up on Seminole, but because Seminole is such a long way away, and it's also a really big lake, A lot of people didn't seem really enthusiastic about it, so they weren't getting the turnout that they were hoping for. So they moved it to Istapoga. A couple more people showed up for that. The thing with Istapoga is, like some of the other lakes, or like Kissimmee, it doesn't have a lot of grass anymore. They bombed it a couple years ago, or several years ago, and they've since replanted a lot of the hydrilla and eelgrass, but it hasn't completely grown up yet. So the fish were really either in the reeds or on the pads on the sides. I didn't catch any in pre-fish. I had one on the line. But what saved me there was just running into a local who said, oh, I got a fish. I don't think he's big. What the? Yeah, that's not what I expected. This won't do. Okay, so like I was saying before I get interrupted by that dink, ran into this local at the boat ramp who asked me how I did. I said, I had two on. Really didn't catch anything though. And he said, yeah, I had 3, but they were all over on this side. And then he said something that was important to me. And he said, the water is better over there. And I said, is the water clarity much better, drastically different? And he said, oh yeah, it's way better over in this section. He's like, I caught all this fish over here. And he's like, they were just up in the pads and the reeds, but the water clarity is way, way better. And one of the things that, if you can find good, clean water here in Florida, you can find good fish. The water here in St. John's right now, it's not bad. So I ended up going over to that spot, which was where I was going to go for the tournament, but let's say in the opposite direction. So I went into the spot all by myself, fished it, caught one. I think I had one fish in about first 30 minutes, and then nothing for the next 2 hours until I caught the big one that was 21 and a quarter inches long. So I caught that fish, and then caught a few more little ones, all little, on a speed worm, on the edge of the pads. Ran into Chris, and when I ran into Chris, he caught a 22-incher, and I heard the fish splashing around. I heard him shouting, so I knew that I had to make something happen. Ended up making a run. Chris and I passed each other, and what irks me is that this is where there's a few mistakes that I make every tournament came in. Coming off the boat ramp after my second move, I had a fish on, and I lost him. Probably 15, 16 inches. About 30 minutes later, I had another one on, closer to 17, 18, and I lost him too, right at the kayak. I knew that there wasn't much room separating me, Chris, and James, who were in the top 3. In fact, there's probably less than a few inches, and those fish would have made a huge difference. So the next lake was Lake Toho, and it got moved from the Harris chain of lakes. They were going to try to have a bigger tournament for ICAST, but ICAST got canceled because of coronavirus. So I ended up fishing this tournament, and I knew this tournament was going to be tough because when that lake is on, it's on, and when it's off, it's off. And the fish will always bite on that lake, but you've got to find them. And in the summer, they typically move offshore onto shell beds or into offshore hydrilla patches. Now, I caught fish up shallow, and I've always fished shallow. That's what I'm good at. That's what I know how to do. This I've done it all my life, sight fishing. Kind of like, I believe it's John Cox does that a lot too. I'm very comfortable in shallow water, stuff where I can see rivers, things like that. But what happened was that in my pre-fish, I'd catch 3 or 4 fish, which was good. I'd mark off the spots, memorize where they were at. And then the day before the tournament, I went to one more spot just to be sure. Caught a 6-pounder, and then a couple more in that 15, 16-inch range. Now, I didn't go there during the tournament. I figured if I just hit that spot today, probably shouldn't go there that morning. I'll come back in the afternoon after the fish. If I had at least, around a day's worth of rest before I go back and try to hit them again. None of the fish were in any of the spots that I'd practiced. And I had this feeling that if they weren't there, I wasn't going to do well. I knew the fish would be offshore, but really I had no way to find them. I didn't have this electronic unit yet, anything like that, so I wasn't able to find shell beds or offshore brush piles, things like that. I mean, I guess I could, but I would have to go drag a worm or a crankbait across the bottom for God knows how long before I find something, and that's not what I wanted to do that day. So I went out, hit my regular spots. There's one grass field that I had marked off, didn't catch anything there. Quite a few bites from non-bass, and I caught one good one off some isolated lily pads that were out in the middle of well, quite a bit offshore, let's put it that way. And that was it. Chris, who I was battling out for Angler of the Year with, also did not have a great day. Caught his 3 fish right before the storms rolled in, all off a shell bed. And the gentleman who won and the gentleman who took second, Mark and James, or Jake, sorry, they were fishing offshore hydrilla. They had found some, and Mark put up a ridiculous number. I think overall I finished 15th for that tournament, which is my worst finish of the season. So the next tournament was Swanee. This was the last tournament of the season. It was on the Swanee River. I was really excited because I fished rivers and streams all my life as a kid. So going and fishing one should be pretty much, that should be cake for me. I love fishing rivers and streams, especially ones with current. St. John's a little bit different. I view St. John's just a giant lake. But got to catch my first Swanee bass ever. And I had success in the pre-fish. So first I was thinking, okay, these fish are going to be kind of stacked up in slack current in places around docks and stuff like that. And I caught a couple off of some docks, but that's not really where they were at. The second time I went up, I caught my limit, plus a few extras, and I was catching them off of lily pads, kind of like I'm doing right now. Only I was throwing Senkos and stuff, and I knew the fish weren't going to be big. So here's my mentality going into that: was I need to throw something that's a small bait so I can get numbers. I don't need to catch big fish. I just need to catch numbers. Get 5 in the boat first, just like always, and then begin to call. Now I know that those fish specifically like crayfish from things I was reading, and fish that live in river systems where there are crayfish, that's like 90% of their forage. So instead of taking like a bandito bug or something like that and throwing it, I decided to take a Senko, because it would also kind of mimic a fish. Wacky rigate, and when you pop it, the two ends look like crayfish kind of fluttering. So I did that, and I had a lot of success with it. Unfortunately, I caught a lot of bowfin that day too, including 1 or 2 really big ones. What sucked is I had the game plan down. I realized that if I catch one good fish, that could mean the difference between winning the tournament and not. And I had caught one good one in the third spot that I had decided to go to during the pre-fish that was around 19 inches, and it fought really hard. Now, the thing that really sucked was that because of how the day went, I wasn't going to have time to go to that third spot. I had my limit by 10, but we have to be off the water by 3, lines out by 3, everything submitted by 3:30, and the places that I was fishing did not have a lot of cell service. I bumped right there. So what I ended up having to do was drive into town to submit my fish all at once, and then head back out, and then drive back into town again to submit my fish before the deadline. So that kind of limited me on the amount of time I had to actually go out and fish. So I didn't get to go to my third spot. At the second spot I was at, fishing the shoreline, I had success skipping the lily pads, skipping a Senko either along the sides of the lily pads or up against the roots of cypress trees. As soon as this Senko, I found one spot that looked really good because there's a lot of current around the tree, and the fish seemed to be favoring the side with the stronger current. Just hiding behind breaks, either groups of lily pads or cypress trees and stuff like that. So I skipped the Senko up against the base of the cypress tree. As soon as it hit the base of the cypress tree, I saw something grab it. Really wasn't sure what it was. Set the hook, ended up hooking into a big bass. It was probably 4 or 5 pounds, and that's big for the river, at least in my experience. And I lost it right at the kayak. Mostly because I didn't try to net it, tried to pick it up, and that was dumb. That was stupid on my part. I should have just netted it. That's why I have a net. So it ended up getting off. I ended up not catching it. Caught another one in the exact same spot, so there were two there. It was only 14 inches, but it was a definitely needed upgrade. Got into town, submitted my fish, found out, hey, I'm tied for technically first, but I'm in second because I probably submitted my fish last to Chris. And then about 30 minutes later, checked this leaderboard again after everything should have closed out, and we've been bumped out by half an inch to a gentleman named Fred. And that made missing that big fish hurt a little bit more. But it is what it is. I had the right thing down. I knew exactly what I should have been doing. I messed up. But if we look at the overall season, I had a really good season. Considering there are between 20 and 30 anglers at almost every event, with the exception of one, which was the last one where we had about 12. I think most of the people who had their spots secured for the championship weren't going to make the long run. So I ended up first overall in points, and here's the breakdown of my placement. So Okeechobee was second, 5th at Salt Springs, 10th at Fellsmere, and then I started a good run where I was 2nd at Orange Lake, 3rd at Kissimmee, 3rd at Istapoga. Kind of dropped the ball at my home lake, Toho, finishing 15th, and then taking a 3rd place finish at Swanee. So no wins this year. A little winless on the trail, which is kind of disappointing considering I had 2 or 3 chances to win and just couldn't capitalize on it. But overall, not too bad. Got Angler of the Year. I'm happy with that. Looking forward to the next season. More importantly, looking forward to the championship, where if I can just not make any mistakes, I think I have a chance of winning. I just got to find some fish. And right now, they are being pretty finicky. I think I know where they're going to be at. I'm just trying to eliminate some water right now. But that's the KAF season in a nutshell. And if you guys want to hop in on that, again, it's $50. The payment information and stuff like that is on their Facebook page. I will link that in the description if you're interested. We had about 60 anglers total last year, over 60 anglers I want to say, and we had an active group of about 20 to 30. So it'd be cool to see that increase. It's a cool group of people. Everybody loves fishing. Everybody's very friendly. Thanks to Jerry for giving me that bottle of water at Istapoga, because I thought I was gonna. Well, I wasn't going to die, but it was going to be a really rough ride to the convenience store to get some hydration. But come on, hang out with us. Come compete. It'll be great. They're able to answer all your questions if you want to send them a message on Facebook. But the new season starts in November. And with that, I'm out. I'm going to continue to pre-fish and enjoy myself here. Got a month to prepare for this tournament. And hopefully I can pull off a win.